All right, everybody, thank you. As one of the locals and natives here, again, thanks for hanging out in Philadelphia. We've got some gorgeous weather today. A big thanks to Domino for having us here. We've had some great speakers throughout the day, really shared some insights. And from my perspective, the value of something like this coming together to share best practices, to share common thoughts, to share common directions is absolutely critical to the industry. We're all in the position of trying to get a therapy to market. And the more that we can do to share ideas, to share goals and objectives, I think that's absolutely the way to do it. I'm really happy to be here with an esteemed panel. We're going to be talking about the operationalization of AI. AI's presumptive value is highly defined and anticipated in every business case that gets submitted for investment. We look at that, but the reality, the realized value, only comes after it's operationalized. It has to be implemented, it has to be utilized, and it has to actually generate value. Before you can scale AI, you need the right foundation that you can trust. You need compute power that you can access. And you need a robust set of tools that scientists, research scientists, and data scientists can use. I'm happy to introduce today's panel. Today's panel sits at that point of inflection where they have to bring in, implement, distribute, well, first define, then distribute these tools to their user community, to the research scientists and the data scientists. Asha Mahesh leads AI and data science efforts at Johnson & Johnson Innovative Medicines with a focus on clinical development, ethics, and reproducibility. She's been with J&J since 2019. Dave Johnson is the CEO and co-founder of Dash Bio, a platform company scaling bioanalysis. Previously, he was Chief Data and AI Officer at Moderna, where he led AI and platform development. And Ian Misner leads platform strategy for oncology R&D at AstraZeneca, focusing on modern infrastructure, self-service analytics. He's been with AZ for nearly 5 years, following prior roles in data science and bioinformatics across industry and academia. So again, very grateful to my panel. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing ideas. I'll be asking some questions for each of you. We will have an opportunity to respond to everyone's question. I would just remind that we will be on time. So if I give the hook, sorry. Ian, let's start with you. You led the move from a legacy infrastructure to what we would call a modern platform for oncology. What drove the shift, and how has it changed the way your scientists and data scientists work?
Yeah, so at AstraZeneca, like a lot of these large corporations we're all involved with, you get a bunch of data silos and teams trying to build solutions bespoke across use cases and the various business units. And so it was becoming clear that in the oncology R&D space, we needed to kind of start to simplify and coalesce around some principles, really more so than a platform or a system, but how we wanted to operate. It started with data, and so Ronan and I, came up with the concept of this fair analytics, where we added an extra R around reproducibility, but it's about things you've already said around trust, data access, and democratization of tools and utility for the data scientists to then do the work that they need to do to accelerate and deliver, whether it be novel therapies or just new pathways and information to our clinical groups who are running trials and doing work. So the efforts that we started with were really more principle-based than what we had. So we had a ton of IT infrastructure and bespoke tools, and what we ended up moving towards was a simplified solution that we're very much in the beginning of. So we launched a platform that you may be familiar with in October of last year, and we'll talk more about that as we go through the panel. But honestly, the acceptance and the need was very clear to move away from some of the legacy HPC systems or just one-off tools that may be qualified or not for GXP use, but there's just collaboration was becoming difficult, and sharing of knowledge across groups was stagnating.
And what was the response? How has the adoption been?
The adoption's been very, very well, very, very good. So a ton of self-reporting, right? So I'm in the product space. I was just telling some of the folks here, we sent a survey out to advance the business case. We have about 250 users and had over half of the people respond without being begged, right? So that alone is a good sign that people are happy with the utility of the tools and the capabilities it gives them, because ultimately it just makes their day job easier, right? So we have people saying it's saving them up to 50% of their time from not having to find things or get a workspace spun up or just do a lot of the busy work that is involved, and they're not actually doing true data science.
That's great.
Can I add one thing on that?
Yep.
Recently, we had a conversation with some of our leadership and then the stakeholders. There's one statement somebody made, it kind of stood out, is they said the domino and a few other things that we put in place, it literally God sent. So,
yeah. That's a telling statement. Yeah. Asha, I am going to jump to you. So you built a strong collaboration across therapeutic areas, which is always a challenge. It's a semantic challenge, it's a technology challenge. How do you drive, or how did you drive, shared learnings while still maintaining governance in your regulatory overseen environment?
Yeah, in terms of, I would say, when we started deploying Domino back, that was like 2019, 2020, early 2020, we started the deployment. So we internally branded, saying like it's an open data science lab. It's not so much a Domino, a platform. Instead, it is a data science lab with openness. So we actually emphasized that on that open word per se, and then brought up, I would say, synergies across the therapeutic areas and also functions. So as you know, we work across all the clinical development, drug discovery, and all those life cycle of the whole drug. So, having this kind of, I would say, a platform that's connected. I also want to emphasize on people used to connect through, we have Bitbucket, we have coding and all those things. That is typically people connect through that. But however, bringing data, apps, what you can do with your data, putting out an app very quickly, and also to be able to share that, and also to be able to search who is doing what was a big thing for us, right? As long as we also emphasized on putting up the right metadata description, that way people can search what they're doing. And also it became an incentive for data scientists to say, hey, I want to make my work known, right? That's how we kind of, I would say, motivated people to become more open, share their work, and collaborate. And also you see, as the data science is evolving so quickly, there are so much of I would say knowledge that's in pockets. But however, if they do it right, and if they make that whatever their work is open, of course with the governance. In terms of the governance, Domino's ability to provide that whole different levels of collaboration in terms of read-only access, more I would say granular type of access control, that also helps, right? Sometimes you want to make your project read-only, sometimes you want that to be more collaboratively, people are working together. So to be able to collaborate on data, code, and apps, and also the environments and the compute, that was the power of the Domino.
That's good. Speaking of regulatory environments, Dave, many of the clinical development workflows depend on unique or distinct fragmented processes, point solutions, and disconnected systems, which has always been a challenge as long as I've been in the industry. DashBio is building a platform to change that. What does it take, and what does it mean to modernize bioanalysis with this new platform?
Yeah, there's this really interesting cognitive dissonance I'm sure we're all feeling, where on the one hand, there's generative AI and we're vibing everything and all our jobs are going to be replaced by AI. And then there's a reality that I'm sure we all live, that all of the data in biopharma is stuck in spreadsheets and PowerPoints on people's desktops, right? There's a big gulf between the reality of today and the art of the possible. And I was at Moderna for a decade and spent a great deal of that working in research to kind of transform how data is captured and structured to make it amenable for AI. Because all the use cases we had that were of any significance were all where we had really incredible, homogeneous, rich data sets, right? When you move to the clinic, you would think with the tens or hundreds of millions of dollars that clinical studies cost, that the situation would be better. The reality is it's not, right? It's still heavily governed by spreadsheets and paper-based records and manual processes and FTP data transfers. It's like going back in time 20 years. And it's a problem that I was so frustrated with, our inability to kind of do anything because of the way the CROs are structured and their incentive structures work, that I decided to found my own company, which is Dash Bio, to reinvent the concept of a CRO in a tech-first way. And I went as far as like building our own GLP-compliant lab for this, because when the processes are so broken that just slapping a layer of software on top of it is not enough. You have to blow them up and start from scratch. And so that's what we're doing at Dash. We're reinventing bioanalysis. So this is the testing of samples in clinical studies. So we drop in just like any other CRO. You send us samples. We send you data on the other side. But instead of doing it all with a bunch of hands at a bench pipetting and Excel data analysis, we're using robotic liquid handlers, AI analysis, end-to-end integrated software. And because of that, the quality of the data is much better, much more consistent. The turnaround times are literally 10 times faster than our competitors. So think days, not months for turnaround here. And we're working right now on using the high quality data that we have to build our own ML and AI models on top of it to move the industry beyond that. So the kind of thesis and just what I've done through my whole career is if the process is broken, like we spend a lot of time trying to wring as much value as we can out of the lousy data that we get, but sometimes you just have to throw it away and purposely build that data from scratch.
And that's the ambition, is to build a new data structure, new data, a more fit for purpose data set as output?
Beyond just data set, the actual analysis itself, right? Starting with bioanalysis, but the world's a big place, so we'll go from there.
Fair enough. Ian, it's actually, for me, it's always interesting because, I'm a lot older than all of you guys. So when I think about the influx of data scientists in pharma, when I started, I was amazed at the capability of engineering and data science for people who weren't really data scientists. They were chemists, right? They were biologists. Now we have armies of data scientists that we're serving in pharma. Your data scientists can now spin up environments, launch projects, collaborate much more easily and effectively. But what's in the context of that, what's the biggest change that you're seeing? How have your users reacted to this? Are they collaborating more effectively? Is data being shared more effectively, created and disseminated more effectively?
Yeah, so that, just to build off the 2 points here as well, when it comes to the data, the biggest issue we have is both finding what someone did, right? So it's like, oh, you have to go find Joe. He worked here 5 years ago. It's on his computer somewhere. So that's not very fair and findable. But then the other part is someone's in this pipeline that we're all in, someone's end point, like here I'm done with my job, is literally someone else's start point. And so a system and a platform like this helps to actually do those handoffs in a meaningful way that you can then build an entire chain of those handoffs that go into a pipeline from we have an interesting target or mechanism in action, or if you look at a trial space, here's a group of non-responders. What would they respond to based on the data we have? And then we can connect all of those steps that happen in a large company like AstraZeneca into an actual product and pipeline that people can share and collaborate on.
And you're seeing that come to fruition?
Again, October.
It's early, yeah.
That's early, but yes, some of this is already happening. And even on the other end of it is as our companies grow and we bring new people in and we move around, that institutional knowledge is very hard to share, right? So we've already seen people joining teams that have started on this journey go from it took 6-7 weeks to get kind of comfortable with what your job is, where the data is, how to do things, and just kind of within a week or so just be up and running. Because everything's just, oh, here's the workspace, here's the project we're doing, here's all the code connected, what questions do you have? And now with generative AI and all those connectabilities, you can just get quick summaries and digest of that. And so the learning process of what we're doing and sharing of the knowledge is a lot easier.
It'll be good to hear a follow-up from that in early November.
Yeah, exactly.
and see how that works. Dave, just a quick follow-up to the last question for you. So we talked about the disparate systems that you have, the point solutions that you have to deal with. It comes back to the data. The data interoperability is still a major barrier. So across the clinical teams, what does the data flow really look like? And what's needed from your perspective to build a really unified platform to manage, not just manage the data, but as you said, on top of that, to manage and analyze it such that you get an actionable outcome or an actionable decision?
I mean, outside of the CDISC type standards, I don't think there's much interoperability at all in practice. Like, there are standards out there that people don't use. A lot of what you see in the clinic is manual human data transfers through SFTPs, sometimes SharePoint even, all highly manual, labor-intensive with data managers doing this work. I think one of the challenges we see, not just in the clinic, but in research as well, is that every vendor, whether it's a software vendor or an instrument vendor, wants to own it, wants to be the holder, center of gravity for data. And so they view the lack of interoperability as a feature, not a bug, right? It's not that they're necessarily doing it, though I'm sure some are nefarious about it, but they just don't necessarily care, because if your data is hard to get out, that's actually helpful to them. And so I think a lot needs to change in terms of what we demand of our vendors for the format of data that comes through that would start to change this. So if you think about how the web exists now, like, it's all open standards, open source solutions, and then you build innovation on top of that. And I believe data standards, data interoperability should be that way. There are standards bodies like, Pistoia does some, Allotrope does some others. I think there needs to be more in kind of the low friction, lightweight, open source solutions that are very practical to deliver that work.
Now, that's editorial comment. That's music to my ears, because I've been saying that since I started 35 years ago. Why aren't the pharma companies insisting that the vendors work to make things easier to get that data out and to get it integrated? So the more that gets pushed, the farther and faster we move.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that just bugged me my entire career is just instrument data.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's great to model data if you can actually read it. But the first question is always, well, can we actually even extract the data out of the proprietary format? Right? And I know that's what Allotrope is doing, but for years ago, I talked to them and they said, well, the actual implementation of Allotrope models is outside the scope of Allotrope, which blew my mind, because like, well, what am I supposed to do with that, right?
Yeah, that's not helpful.
It's not helpful, right? Actual practical solutions. So I'm a big believer in open source. If others are interested in tackling this problem, I'd love to kind of chat.
Yeah, I agree completely on that. Asha, you focused on trust, validation, and importantly, in your space, human-in-the-loop design. As AI progresses in clinical decision-making, clinical decision support, how are you considering not just capabilities at scale, but the corresponding confidence in those capabilities?
Yeah, I mean, that's really important, especially when we are dealing with the Gen AI and those space, where explainability becomes challenging because the models are too big to be explained anything at this point. So human in the loop is critical to build the trust. At the same time, in my experience over the last, I would say, working with the Gen AI large language models, is building the trust with humans who are in the loop is also another challenge, right? We need to start somewhere. We need to start with building that trust with the humans. So in order to do so, there are a few things. I mean, in generally with AI, leaving the LLM, large language model, and all those things out. Even we started with just having an AI, especially in some cases in the precision medicine, we try like a diagnostic grade AI, right, where it has the ability to look at a slide or an image to be able to even predict a mutation, gene mutation. In those cases, it is challenging to build the trust, but however, we go through very rigorous process of like analytical validation, clinical validation, all those validation. On top of that, we go through the user validation. That's really important. How do a user react to something in their day-to-day workflow? That is really a critical element. I want to give a specific example of using a Gen AI. Last year, I was doing some pilots and proof of concept with one of my clinical development leader. So initially we started out, well, okay, you can ask a question on clinical study report saying, oh, how about the progression-free survival between like between two studies or whatever, across multiple studies. But the feedback we got is, oh, the responses are good, but how do I trust that response that's coming out, right? And then we said, oh, let's put all the links to the source documents where we are picking up. They're like, no, that's not good enough. I need to click on each one of them and I have to go through that. That's not good enough for me. So we even took the next iteration of actually having a pop-up, like as you hover over the content, there is a pop-up that comes up showing the exact paragraph, exact table that we extracted that information on. They're like, wow, this makes sense to me now, where we are getting how we are actually formulating the response for my questions. So that way, keep in mind, the user friendliness is the key. So in some cases, we even highlighted the text that we are getting the responses from when we are drafting new content or anything, highlighting, say, hey, these are the areas. The model is not confident at all. We have very low confidence scores. Pay more attention to that. Go do your research. Those are all the things you can do. It looks simple at the surface, but it's still hard to do. But at the same time, keep that human in your mind when you're actually producing that output. And anything you make it easier for them to use, that's how you build the trust.
So the only quibble, just to jump in, on human in the loop is there's a difference between humans in the loop because of change management and humans in the loop because the model's not good enough, right? In the latter case, it's important. The model has errors, and the point you made about quantifying the errors where it's less certain to have the human do that is awesome. But in a lot of cases, the models are better than humans, and they shouldn't be in the loop, in my opinion, long term, but it's there to help them ease into that. So I think it's important as you divide those up.
Yeah.
Fair enough. For each of you, you're dealing with collectively an incredibly broad spectrum of use cases where you're serving the institutional needs of your respective companies and an incredibly disparate set of potential users with a incredibly complex and disparate set of data. To justify to the powers that be, of course Dave is the power that be, but to justify the powers that be, you have to define some level of this is successful, and as a success, it's XYZ value. How do you go in and define success and value? And Ian?
Oh, sure. I mean, it's been something that we've tried to tackle directly with looking at, honestly, a lot of the issues at this point are people, process, and politics, right? So it is around what can we do and measure around making things faster, right? Because the business of doing science is delivering scientific value and knowledge to human use cases, but as a business with some level of profitability to keep everything going. So the biggest spend is people time. And so if we can reduce the time people spend doing tasks and get them focused on what they're then delivering the value, it's the easiest path forward to move some of these things forward, at least in our initial phase that we're in, right? So it's like instantly saying people are self-reporting that they're 30 to 50% more efficient now than they were in October.
Fair enough.
And so just calculate out how much they cost an hour and the numbers write themselves pretty easily, and finance can get behind that, right? So changing the first talk was is about changing the paradigm of the actual business implementation of the technology in this case. And that's one of the mechanisms we're using right now to do that.
Fair enough. Asha, what do you think? How do you define that success and corresponding value such that it continues the flow of investment?
Yeah, I mean, there are many ways to quantify that, right? I mean, we do measure what is the productivity increase, what is the efficiency gain. All those things, measurements are there quantitatively as well as qualitatively. We do collect that information from the user group and all those things. But there are also some organic way to look at the success is how well it is getting integrated into their workflow, right? Is it part of their day-to-day, or is it something that we are forcing them to do that? So you need to get a feel for that. There are sometimes what I have seen is we have invested like so much, and the adaptability is not there. At the same time, you make a little change that actually helps them with their workflow. There is a huge adoption. So it's a balancing act in terms of the investment and how you want to see the adoption. But yeah, it's case by case, I would say.
Fair enough. Dave?
Yeah.
Well, like you said, I'm the power of the being, so I call all the shots, so it's great.
Right, but they have to tell you.
As I think about allocating resources, it always comes down to ROI, right? And the I is usually easy to calculate, at least on a technical level. People always underestimate the change management aspect of that. It's the return that is always very squishy in pharma because people generally are good at measuring their business. And so something we care very deeply about is how we measure what is our actual quality metric, what is our actual turnaround time metric. I don't actually care about robotics directly. I don't care about AI models directly. I care about those KPIs, which naturally lead you to use those as the way to advance those.
Yep. All right, as we're coming up on time, I'm going to ask you each to give one or two, to be fair, one or two sentences on one question, each of you, starting with Asha. What's one challenge that we can address collectively as an industry that'll move the needle forwards for you?
You're asking from a technological perspective. Yeah, that's a good question. Collectively, I would say we talk a lot about patient centricity, right? I mean, at least in our case, every time every town hall,
Okay,
every
two sentences.
Sorry. I would say, think of that patient. Think from their perspective. Do everything that's going to actually resonate with them. They make their life easier.
Fair enough, Dave.
Elimination of animal testing, particularly tox testing. I think it's amazing the FDA is pushing for it. I think they're dreaming if they think it'll be done in 5 years, especially if we don't collaborate and share data sets to actually make it happen.
Fair enough. I'd love to talk to you about that offline as well.
Yeah, I was going to say something about the patient, but that's already been done, but I agree with that. I think the other piece is what we've talked about. It's the interoperability of our data sets, right? We collect data for a very specific purpose, but we are not going to be able to answer the human health questions with those data sets. We're going to have to make sure they work across the spectrum of people.
Yeah, I think that getting everybody around the same table to talk about that interoperability, I mean, if we can get it done, it makes a huge difference. I want to thank all of you today, again, thanking Domino, but thank all of you for joining us. I know each of you has an incredibly busy schedule. Thanks to our speakers. These folks are addressing on a day-to-day basis, as are many of you, both the evolving opportunities and the challenges every single day. AI isn't a catchphrase or a pipe dream. It's core to our innovation. We have to figure out how to implement it such that we get A, the maximum value, and B, to show that value and demonstrate that value in terms of impact, in terms of therapies out to the market. I'd encourage everyone here, as I always do at every talk, to keep the conversation going. You've met people here. It's one thing that I think is the most valuable for a gathering like this. Keep talking to each other. Keep sharing ideas. Come back to the next gathering. And with that, I'd like to offer a big thanks to our speakers.